Chapter 1. Born in a Cabin, 1809 to 1816. Narrative script, about 1,200 words. The winter sun barely pierced the grey Kentucky sky on the morning of February 12, 1809, when a thin cry echoed from a one-room log cabin at Sinking Spring Farm. Snow clung to the bark of hickory trees, and the wind pushed against the rough wooden walls. But inside the humble home of Thomas and Nancy Lincoln, a new life began. Abraham Lincoln, the second child of a struggling frontier family. Thomas Lincoln, a sturdy carpenter and farmer, had inherited little more than a strong back and a steady moral compass. Nancy Hanks Lincoln, gentle and devout, brought a quiet grace to the harsh realities of frontier living. Their world was one of hard soil and harder luck. Neighbors were miles apart. Books were rarer than coins, yet this was the crucible in which one of America's greatest leaders would be forged. Life on the frontier demanded strength and relentless labor. Before he could walk steadily, Abraham's small hands were learning to help with chores. At just 2 years old, he toddled among the chickens while his father swung an axe to split rails. At night, when smoke from the fireplace clung to every garment, Nancy hummed soft hymns and whispered stories from the worn family Bible. The boy's wide, dark eyes absorbed every word. But poverty was a stubborn companion. Disputes over land titles forced the Lincolns to move again and again, first within Kentucky and then toward Indiana. Each move meant tearing down what they had built, loading their meager belongings into wagons, and starting over. Abraham, still a small child, felt the uncertainty even if he could not name it. His earliest memories were of motion, creaking wheels, muddy roads, and the constant search for a place to call home. Education was scarce. Schools, when they existed at all, were rough log buildings with more smoke than light, and teachers who might stay only a few months. In total, Abraham's formal schooling would amount to less than a single year spread across many winters. But he possessed a restless curiosity. If a neighbor owned a book, young Abe would walk miles just to borrow it, then read by the glow of the fireplace until his eyelids drooped. A tattered copy of Aesop's Fables, a well-worn Bible, and a biography of George Washington became his treasures. Tragedy arrived when Abraham was just 9. In the autumn of 1818, the mysterious milk sickness caused by cows grazing on poisonous white snake root swept through the region. Nancy Hanks Lincoln fell ill and died within days. For the boy, the loss was shattering. "All that I am, or hope to be, I owe to my angel mother," Lincoln would later say, a tribute born of grief. Thomas built a simple wooden coffin and buried his wife on a quiet hilltop. Abraham stood by the mound of fresh earth, a child suddenly aware of the fragility of life. Months later, Thomas remarried, bringing Sarah Bush Johnston into the household. Sarah, warm and patient, quickly became mother to Abraham and his sister Sarah. She recognized the boy's hunger for knowledge and encouraged his studies, smoothing the path for his self-education. With her support, Abraham's mind stretched beyond the narrow confines of the frontier. He borrowed every book he could find: Pilgrim's Progress, Robinson Crusoe, A Life of Henry Clay. He scribbled arithmetic on wooden shingles, then shaved them clean to reuse them the next day. By his early teens, Abraham had grown tall, remarkably tall, already approaching 6 feet, with long arms and a lean frame hardened by labor. He wielded an axe with ease, splitting logs for neighbors and earning the nickname Rail Splitter. Yet there was a gentleness to him. Neighbors recalled his aversion to cruelty toward animals, his willingness to share food with those in need, his quick humor that could dissolve an argument before it turned violent. Evenings around the fire became his private university. He read aloud to his sister, practiced writing by copying passages from the Bible, and listened to travelers' tales of faraway cities and bustling markets. These stories planted seeds of ambition. There was a world beyond the woods of Indiana, a world that called to him. In 1830, when Abraham was 21, the Lincolns faced another move. this time to Illinois, where richer soil promised better harvests. For Abraham, it marked the end of childhood. The boy who had been born in a Kentucky cabin and shaped by the hardships of Indiana was now a man, strong and self-reliant, ready to step beyond the frontier. His mind brimmed with questions. What lay beyond the Mississippi? What could a young man with little formal education achieve if he was willing to work, to think, to dream? As their wagon creaked westward, Abraham turned for a last look at the rough homestead and the simple grave of his mother. The wind whipped across the prairie, carrying with it both sorrow and hope. Ahead stretched the endless possibilities. Chapter 2. The young man of the frontier, 1830 to 1837, swept across the Midwestern prairie as the Lincoln family's ox-drawn wagon jolted westward. 21-year-old Abraham Lincoln, long-limbed and powerfully built from years of frontier labor, strode beside the wagon for miles at a time. His boots kicked up the damp Illinois soil, and his gray eyes searched the endless horizon. Illinois promised richer farmland than the worn ground they were leaving behind in Indiana. For Thomas Lincoln, it meant another chance at stability. For Abraham, it meant the first real step toward independence. Though still devoted to his father and stepmother, he was no longer a boy. The world was larger now, and he hungered to see it. Within months of settling in Macon County, a fierce outbreak of ague, the frontier's name for malaria, struck the family. Abraham worked tirelessly, draining swamps and chopping wood to fight the disease-carrying mosquitoes. Yet, even amid hardship, he found moments of quiet study. Neighbors often glimpsed the tall young man stretched out beneath a tree, a borrowed book in his hand, lips moving silently as he read. First taste of freedom. When spring returned, Abraham made a decision. He would strike out on his own, hiring himself as a laborer. At 6 feet 4 inches, with a wiry strength and easy smile, he was a welcome helper. He split rails for fences, earning the nickname Rail Splitter that would follow him into politics years later. Soon opportunity knocked. A flatboat merchant needed strong men to pilot goods down the Mississippi River to New Orleans. Abraham signed on without hesitation. The journey opened his eyes. Bustling river towns, steamboats puffing smoke, and, most unforgettable, the slave markets of New Orleans. There, beneath the hot southern sun, he saw men and women in chains, bought and sold like cattle. He never forgot the sight. Years later, as president, he would recall that journey and say quietly, "If slavery is not wrong, nothing is wrong." New Salem and new ambitions. By the summer of 1831, Abraham had settled in New Salem, a small but lively village on the Sangamon River. At first he worked as a store clerk, known for his honesty, so much so that locals began calling him Honest Abe. If he accidentally overcharged a customer by a few pennies, he would walk miles to return the change. New Salem became his proving ground. He joined a debating society, where his quick wit and clear reasoning won admiration. Though his clothes were plain and his accent rustic, people sensed something uncommon in the young man who loved to spin stories and argue points of law late into the night. When a local militia formed during the brief Black Hawk War of 1832, Abraham volunteered. The campaign involved more marching than fighting, but it gave him his first taste of leadership. Fellow soldiers elected him captain, a small honor, yet one he treasured. Years later, he would say it was a success which gave me more pleasure than any I've had since. Entering politics. After the war, Lincoln decided to run for a seat in the Illinois state legislature. He was only 23, barely known beyond New Salem, and he had no formal education to speak of. His campaign relied on handshakes, friendly conversations, and speeches delivered atop barrels in dusty streets. He lost that first race, finishing 8th out of 13 candidates. But the setback only sharpened his resolve. He returned to work, surveying land, clerking in a store, reading law whenever he could find a quiet hour. In 1834, perseverance paid off. Lincoln ran again, and this time won, beginning the first of 4 consecutive terms in the Illinois House of Representatives. To serve effectively, he needed knowledge of the law, so he taught himself, borrowing legal texts, studying by candlelight, and asking questions of every attorney he met. By 1836, he passed the bar exam and was licensed to practice law, forming a mind and a reputation. Life in Springfield, where he moved to start his practice, was both demanding and exciting. He shared a room with fellow legislator Joshua Speed, forging a lifelong friendship. Lincoln's storytelling and gentle humor made him a favorite among colleagues, while his integrity became legendary. But he was not all mirth. Those close to him noticed a strain of melancholy, a quiet brooding that sometimes overtook his long evenings of study. He once confided that he was the most miserable man living, a depth of feeling that would shape both his compassion and his perseverance. By the close of the decade, Abraham Lincoln had transformed from a rail-splitting farmhand into a respected young lawyer and legislator. He was still the plain, lanky fellow with a homespun drawl, but his ambitions had outgrown the tiny village of New Salem. The self-educated frontier boy was stepping onto a broader stage, driven by a belief that hard work and moral purpose could lift a man, and perhaps a nation. Chapter 3. A Lawyer of the Prairie, 1837 to 1842. Narrative script, approximately 1,200 words. The move to Springfield, Illinois, in the spring of 1837 marked a decisive turning point in Abraham Lincoln's life. At 28, he arrived with 2 saddlebags, a handful of books, and the ambition of a man determined to rise. The state capital was a bustling frontier town of a few thousand souls, a mix of lawyers, merchants, and politicians who conducted business in wood-framed offices along muddy streets. To Lincoln, it felt like a world of opportunity. Building a legal career. Lincoln quickly partnered with the well-known attorney John T. Stewart, an arrangement that introduced him to the demanding circuits of Illinois law. Twice each year, lawyers and judges rode on horseback from county to county, trying cases in makeshift courtrooms. Days were long, roads rough, and food plain, but Lincoln relished the challenge. On these circuit rides, he earned a reputation for fairness and plain-spoken clarity. He could hold a jury with a simple story, stripping away needless jargon until the truth of a case shone through. Fellow attorneys recalled how he would concede minor points to the opposing side if they were obviously correct, saying, "That is right, now let's talk about what's wrong." Such candor surprised some clients, but usually won their cases. By the early 1840s, he had become one of the most respected lawyers in Illinois, handling everything from land disputes to criminal defenses. His colleagues admired not just his sharp mind, but his ability to empathize with clients from every walk of life, farmers, shopkeepers, and railroad investors alike. A personal world expands. Life in Springfield was not all courtroom arguments. Boarding with friends, Lincoln developed a circle of close companions who appreciated his storytelling and quiet humor. Evenings often found him spinning frontier tales that left the room roaring with laughter, only to pivot suddenly to thoughtful discussions of philosophy or politics. It was during these years that Lincoln met Mary Todd, a spirited young woman from a prominent Kentucky family. Mary was well-educated, witty, and politically astute, a match for Lincoln's quick mind. Their courtship, however, was anything but smooth. They first met in 1839 and quickly became engaged, but Lincoln's lingering self-doubt and brooding nature led to a painful break in early 1841. Friends worried about his melancholy. He walked the streets at night, eyes downcast, wrestling with questions of purpose and destiny. Yet this dark period also deepened his empathy, a quality that would later define his presidency. Reconciliation and marriage. Despite the breakup, Lincoln and Mary found their way back to each other. After months of reflection and encouragement from mutual friends, they rekindled their relationship. On November 4, 1842, Abraham Lincoln and Mary Todd were married in the parlor of her sister's home. The marriage brought both joy and challenge. Mary's strong opinions sometimes clashed with Lincoln's gentle patience, but their bond was genuine. Over the next few years, they would welcome 4 sons, though tragedy would later touch the family more than once. Political reawakening. Even as Lincoln built his legal practice, politics remained a steady drumbeat in his life. He served multiple terms in the Illinois legislature, where he joined a group known as the Long Nine, so named because all were exceptionally tall, advocating to move the state capital from Vandalia to Springfield. Their success helped secure Springfield's future and boosted Lincoln's reputation as a skillful negotiator. He also began sharpening his views on the nation's great question, slavery. While not yet an outright abolitionist, Lincoln opposed the spread of slavery into new territories. He believed firmly in the principles of the Declaration of Independence, that all men were created equal, and warned that the young republic could not endure half slave and half free. In speeches and private conversations, he argued that America must find a way to place slavery in the course of ultimate extinction, a phrase that foreshadowed the moral struggle to come. A style of his own. Lincoln's public speaking style evolved during these Springfield years. He rejected bombast for clarity and logic, weaving vivid stories to illustrate complex ideas. Audiences who expected grand oratory instead found themselves disarmed by his simple honesty. "He talks to you like a neighbor," one listener remarked, "and yet he makes you see things you never saw before." Behind that neighborly manner was a fierce intellect. He read law, history, mathematics, and Shakespeare late into the night, his long frame stretched across a sofa, a lamp flickering beside him. The boy who once studied by firelight now shaped himself into a thinker capable of guiding a nation. Foundations for the Future. By 1842, Abraham Lincoln.